right, so you might be forgiven for not knowing what stage of power cuts we are in at any given moment, because it's all getting quite confusing. We woke up to news of stage 4 after overnight breakdowns at 5 power stations. We're heading into stage 2 from midnight tonight, and then, well, tomorrow is another day. And as we grapple with the many challenges of power supply in South Africa, I think it's important to get perspective from an infrastructure and energy finance specialist who has worked across sub-Saharan Africa for over 2 decades. And I'm joined now by Ruse Moleshe. Ms. Moleshe, thank you so much for your time this evening. As we're sitting here once more in stage 4, it's very hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, and not imagine that it might be an oncoming train. But if you look at what Eskom is saying and doing, do you believe that generally they're on the right track?
Good evening, Sally. Good evening to the listeners as well. It's very difficult to say whether Eskom is on the right track or not, but if we are on stage 4 load shedding, that can give you an indication that we have a serious problem. And part of the reason why I say that is because out of the power plants that are out, which is almost 20,000 megawatts, only 5,000 is under planned maintenance. About 15,000 is unplanned maintenance. That means that we are definitely not on top of the situation for whatever reasons.
15,000 megawatts unplanned, so that's breakdowns. I spoke to Eskom Sikunati Manchancha, and he said, look, it is because these power stations are just far too old. And then, of course, we think back to political decisions that were made or not made to build new power stations when Eskom was asking for them back in the early 2000s. Do you think that that's the main reason we're in the trouble we are, that the builds just didn't come when they should have, and now we're sitting with a very old fleet that's prone to breakdowns?
Sally, it is true that the builds were not done when they were supposed to. However, we must remember that in 2007 or thereabout, or 2005, some of the new capacity, which is the Eskom build program, including Kusile, Medupi, Ingula, were the big program that Eskom subsequently undertook. That program has not yielded the results that were expected. Medupi is not performing according to where it's supposed to be. Kusile, the same issue. Luckily, Ingula is working fine. So although we can go back and say this is what we should have done, we do have a problem with the fleet that is relatively new as well. Yes, we do have old coal-fired power plants that are above 50 years, above 40 years, but we do have power plants that are not as old. We were told by Eskom that they are doing reliability maintenance in order to make sure that at least there is some level of performance that we can get out of these plants. Now we are very heavily reliant on diesel, which is a problem because diesel is supposed to be used for emergencies and peaking power. It's expensive. It's not sustainable to continue to rely on diesel. It is bought from international sources, and that impacts on the whole system at the end of the day.
So could Eskom be doing things differently to make sure these unplanned breakdowns are not happening as frequently? You make some excellent points that some of the power stations are not old. What could they be doing differently in terms of their maintenance plan to make sure there are not as many breakdowns, in your view?
Okay, Eskom is telling us that, first and foremost, that some of the delays are related to stocks that are not available. Now, that is not something that's unique to Eskom. Internationally, entities do plan maintenance, and they have stocks that they hold within their premises to be able to use these when the breakdowns, unexpected breakdowns happen. Eskom is telling us that they're not managing this efficiently. Again, Eskom is telling us that the quality of coal that they sometimes get due to corruption and all of that is telling us that that impacts on the functioning of the boilers, and then it increases the outages. So Eskom should be looking at those things that they can control, at least to be able to minimize the impact, barring understanding that yes, some of these plants are old, but those are things that are related to management, related to we are told that they sabotage. Sometimes diesel is delivered, which is I mean, it's paid for but not delivered. Work is paid for from contractors but not done. So some of those things, in my view, are things that Eskom at least could try and get on top of, and then at least we could be able to understand where there are areas which they have no control over.
You've worked extensively in sub-Saharan Africa, but the point was made today at the Africa Energy Conference that there are 600 million people in Africa who don't actually have access to electricity. So can we learn lessons about energy provision from our neighbours in the region?
I mean, relatively speaking, South Africa is one of the biggest entities in terms of both capacity as well as generally in the region. We supply the majority of power and have the biggest capacity. So not to compare that like for like, but if you look at countries like Kenya, which have about 3,000 megawatts, they have excess capacity. And this capacity was built over a certain period of time. And they just made sure that both from independent power producers and also from the entities themselves, that the way they are structured as well, they've changed that to make sure that they can reliably provide capacity to their countries. We have not. Even when we knew we had a problem, we kind of, even today, I think we still kind of dilly-dally instead of getting to the root of the issues and backing down and trying to address the challenges.
We have, of course, also heard last week that this plan to lease out Eskom land, which is part of power station land, so that those independent power suppliers can come on board and be close to the grid, close to the network of electrical lines. They've signed off on an agreement so far. Of course, that's going to take another couple of years, 2 to 3 years' time. But is that the sort of thing we need to see more of? Innovations around incentivizing individual households, individual companies to sell power, excess power, back to the grid. Are those the sorts of things that need to be fast-tracked in your view?
Yeah, I mean, we must commend Eskom for that, for availing that land, and because Eskom is not responsible for making sure that there's procurement of new capacity. So the fact that they have at least been able to provide the land, leasing the land, firstly, they will earn revenues from leasing the land, making sure that this is done where there's already infrastructure in terms of transmission will expedite issues. And also, they are not necessarily saying they will procure the power themselves, but the power, if it's procured in South Africa, whether it's procured by the private sector and all of that, it reduces the burden on Eskom. So on that issue, definitely it's something that we need to commend them. Yes, as you correctly point out, it will take a little bit of time before that capacity comes on stream, but it's the step in the right direction.
I wonder if you can give me some clarity on something that the Energy Minister has said a couple of times now. And he said that there's no problem of capacity on our grid, but our grid is not operating at full capacity. I'm not quite sure what point he's trying to make, because we know that we don't have access to the entire grid because of all these breakdowns. Do you have an understanding of what he's trying to say?
So the people who are saying that there is no issue with capacity are talking about the availability of the power plants, because energy availability factor tends to run around 50% and all of that. That relates to what I mentioned earlier on about unplanned maintenance. So there is a belief that Eskom can do more with the plants to be able to get capacity in. If I can make an example, Medupi has had what you call defects within Dupi, and Eskom had indicated that they were doing reliability maintenance. Some of that is still not available. Then there's also an issue with Unit 4 where there was negligence, and that Unit 4 can only be available in 2023. So it's a mixture of things. In some cases, that Unit 4 was finished, complete, and it was supposed to be running, and it's not running because of that. And that, I mean, we're told is human error. But the impact of that and the implications on that of the system are quite huge. And so some argue because of that, if that could have been available, it would have, the extent of load shedding would have been relatively better. And some of the plans, the reliability maintenance we were told was being done on them, could have brought them on stream. So that is not 15,000 megawatts. That's the argument that is out there.
In your assessment, are we heading for a prolonged period, a couple of years at least, of extreme levels of load shedding? Or do you see Eskom getting us perhaps to just levels 1 and 2 for the foreseeable future? What's your assessment of where we're going?
What is certain, because it's not because of the way that Eskom does not do a root cause analysis, where they come in and provide us with a proper root cause analysis. This is what is an impact. It's a day-to-day, it's old power plants, tomorrow it's sabotage, today is that. So it's very difficult for me to really say with certainty what will happen. But what is certain is that for a prolonged period of time, we are going to experience load shedding. We are going to have unplanned maintenance. And unless we have new capacity that comes on stream, and that gives Eskom also a room to do more, bearing in mind that we're also going to decommission, and we're trying to decommission quite a lot of the power plants as well. So we are heading, that's certain. Whether the extent of that, I wouldn't say, but we are definitely heading towards load shedding for a while.
All right. Well, thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. That is energy expert Ruse Moleshe. Now let's move